My name is Victoria Bowler, and today we are talking about sound before sight, what it is, why we use it, and where it came from. Music is an aural art form. The notation is there as a way to preserve the sounds, but that preservation of the sounds, that notation, is not the music itself. So, how can we teach elementary general music in a way that centers music as an aural art form and focuses on hearing and doing and understanding music? Sound before sight, or sound before symbol, or sound to symbol, these are all names that we use to describe an umbrella principle of education in general. And a lot of music approaches fall under this umbrella, like the Orff Schulwerk, or the Kodaly Concept, or Suzuki, or Feierabend, or music learning theory, things like that. And each of these approaches, they're not all essentially the same. They're all unique from each other. But when we zoom out, when we zoom up and look at pedagogy systems instead of individual methodologies, they all use this umbrella principle of sound before sight. So with a sound before sight approach, we begin learning music through participatory interactions. Participatory interactions meaning singing songs, moving, playing games, playing instruments, listening, things like that. We're going to do all of that before we introduce standardized visual notation and that classroom vocabulary. And what's really cool about this approach is that then when the notation and those vocabulary are introduced, students have already built the definition through their experiences. Sound before sight is the way that we learn language. And while music is not a language, we can take some parallels and learn it in essentially the same way. So when a child is learning their primary language, they are around other people who speak that language, and they're hearing it all the time. They're not just hearing it, but they're hearing it when people tell stories or have conversations. They're hearing the tonal inflections. They're hearing the different weights of the language as people are talking back and forth. They're seeing that language linked to objects or linked to other actions, all of those things. So then when a child is learning how to read, they have years of experience just hearing that language and speaking it themselves, right? Having interactive conversations through that language. And then the orthographic language, the written text itself, has a context. So now let's imagine that we want students to learn to speak and read and write. But what if we were to wait to let them speak until they could read and write? Imagine if we only let students speak and have conversations using words that they could read and write. And then imagine if we decided that we wanted to teach them how to learn this language, their primary language, by going through a method book instead of hearing and speaking that primary language. So when we transfer sound before sight to music education, that just means that we want our young musicians, our student musicians, to have time to interact with music in an aural and an oral way, in an actualized way, before we add an unknown element. So we can use the sound before symbol approach to have a musical experience. And those experiences, they're going to lay the foundation for music literacy instead of making notational literacy in and of itself the main experience. And to me, there's something that feels kind of magical about this approach, and that's the reason that I think it's still highly relevant for music programs today. And that reason is that this approach is much more about learning how to hear music than it is learning how to read music. The emphasis is on developing aural skills, and that can serve them well in any field of music that they decide to go into. So regardless of which musical pathway students do outside of our classroom, the ear training as the foundation that we get from the sound before sight approach is going to be useful. So for example, if a student is learning something by ear, let's say they're learning a song by ear and they're engaging in some sort of informal music learning process, they've developed the aural discrimination to hear a song and learn it by ear. or hear a song and understand the chord chart that they're using. Or let's say they go on to be an audio engineer. They've honed their musical sensitivity, their aural sensitivity, to very specific musical qualities so that they can hear the differences in each track that they're mixing. Or let's say that they're going to go on to be an instrumentalist and play a score for a film. In that case, they have the musical understanding to transfer all of their knowledge and all of their experiences to standardized Western notation. So to me, this approach is really useful and really relevant because it develops aural skills and analytical thinking that students can employ in any field of musicking. Let's back up and talk about where this idea came from. We link this phrase, sound before sight or sound to symbol, we link that back to the work of Johann Pestalozzi and his followers. So Pestalozzi was a Swiss educator from the 18th and 19th centuries, and he pushed this idea of the importance of experience and sensory-based learning called Anschauung. So when we look at the history of music education in the United States, we've applied this idea, sound before sight or sensory-based experiences. We've applied them in many different ways over time in the history of music education in the United States. And even within these different music approaches that we're talking about, Orff Schulwerk, the Kodaly Concept, etc., things like that, those have also evolved over time in how they use this approach. And that's good. Hopefully we'll continue to evolve these methodologies over time. But this thing as the umbrella principle, sound before symbol, that has been pretty consistent. In the next video, we'll talk about some examples of what sound before sight or sound to symbol or sound before symbol, what all of that might look like in an elementary general music classroom. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you have a question or a comment about this video, I would love to hear from you. You can drop a comment below. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Victoria Bowler, or you can shoot me an email, victoria@victoriabowler.com. Thank you so much for watching and happy teaching.